So we're diving into Victorian glass houses.
I know, right?
You were just at Kew Gardens. What an incredible place to spark an interest. And get this, the book we're looking at, People in Glass Houses, it's not just about the architecture.
Oh, absolutely not. It's fascinating how the author uses these structures, to explore bigger ideas like life, resilience, even faith.
Right. It starts with him visiting this restored glass house in Killiney, owned by the Australian ambassador. Can you imagine? And they end up having this whole conversation about family, about building something that lasts. You immediately get the sense that this book is going deeper.
Yeah, that's what makes it so compelling. But let's back up a second. You've been to Kew, you've seen these incredible glass structures.
Yeah.
But why were the Victorians so obsessed with building them in the first place?
Good question. I know they were into their gardens, but it does feel like it's more than that.
It is. Think about it. The Victorian era, this time of huge technological advancement, the Industrial Revolution, right?
Yes.
So you have these massive factories popping up, but at the same time, this almost contradictory fascination with nature. And glass houses become this perfect symbol of both.
Ooh, that's interesting. This clash between the industrial and the natural. It's like they were trying to control nature, but also at the same time celebrate it.
Exactly. They were literally bringing plants back from all over the world, showing off the reach of the empire. And these weren't just simple structures either. Take Decimus Burton, for example, a real pioneer in glasshouse design. He was one of the first to really use wrought iron on a large scale, which made these grand, airy spaces possible. Think Crystal Palace, but on a smaller, more botanical scale.
That's so cool. So you have these innovative structures popping up everywhere, filled with these exotic plants. But it's not just about the plants, is it? The book mentions that these glass houses were used for all sorts of things, like even political speeches. In a glass house. Seems a little bold, no.
Oh. You wouldn't believe it. Politicians like Disraeli, Gladstone, speaking at the Kibble Palace in Glasgow. Can you imagine that happening today? A political rally in the middle of Kew Gardens.
No way. I could just picture the headlines. But that's what I love about this book. It makes you realize that these weren't just greenhouses. They were like the Victorian era's version of, a community center.
Precisely. They hosted gatherings, exhibitions, even religious revivals. Remember those American evangelists, Moody and Sankey? Thousands crammed into the Kibble Palace to hear them preach. They even had a horse-drawn carriage brought inside. Talk about making an entrance.
These Victorians sure knew how to put on a show.
Yeah.
It's amazing how these buildings reflect such a specific moment in time. Speaking of reflections, this is where the author's personal story comes in, right?
It's impossible to separate the man from the glass houses in this book. It all starts with him restoring this old 18th century bishop's palace in Belfast, which just happened to have these beautiful glass houses attached. But what's really interesting is that this project coincides with a really, really tumultuous period in his life.
Oh, so the restoration becomes this kind of metaphor. It's like his own life is mirroring that, the fragility and resilience of these glass structures he's trying to rebuild.
Exactly. And the book, it doesn't shy away from that parallel at all. It goes deep into his struggles, his search for solid ground, that feeling you get when everything feels a bit precarious, like you're walking on glass.
Okay, now that you mention it, there's this almost ironic tension with these glass houses.
Right.
There are these symbols of strength, progress, all that Victorian grandiosity. But at the same time, they're incredibly delicate.
Right. One good storm and then...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how does the author kind of bring those ideas together? How does he find his own strength amidst all this fragility?
Well, he keeps coming back to this idea of restoration. He talks about the Kibble Palace, which was literally on the verge of collapse. They had to painstakingly piece it back together. And it becomes this metaphor for, putting your own life back together.
Wow. I'm seeing these buildings get a whole new light now. They're not just, pretty to look at. There's this whole layer of meaning about overcoming challenges, finding that inner strength.
And the book is full of these little details that really drive that point home. Remember that part about the restoration of the glass houses at Photo House? They use this wood called akoya, which is supposed to be incredibly durable. It can withstand practically anything.
Okay, so that's no accident. He's using these very specific examples to reflect his own journey, back to resilience.
Exactly. He even talks about painting the Ballyfin glass house black, which is kind of shocking, right? Victorian glass houses are almost always white, but he wanted to make the light stand out more, both visually and symbolically.
I love that. It's like he's saying, even in the darkest times, there's still beauty to be found,
Yeah.
You have to actively seek it out, create it even. Which brings us back to this idea of glass houses as metaphors. What else does the author kind of explore there?
Well, he talks about how these spaces, as controlled and artificial as they are, still represent this deep human need for connection with nature.
That's so interesting because you don't usually think of like a man-made structure as being particularly natural.
Right. But he argues that glass houses allow us to kind of experience nature in a new way, to appreciate its beauty, its diversity, even in the depths of winter. And I think there's something to be said for that, this idea that we can create spaces that foster a sense of wonder, of appreciation for the natural world.
And it's not just about appreciating nature. It's about understanding like our place within it, right?
Absolutely. He draws this parallel between the Wardian case, which protected those delicate plants during those long sea voyages, and our own human need for security. It's like he's saying we all crave that sense of being sheltered, of having a safe space to grow.
Which is fascinating, considering the fragility of glass houses themselves. It's like this beautiful contradiction.
Exactly. And for the author, that sense of security, that safe space, is ultimately found in faith.
That makes sense. It's like he's drawing this parallel between, the careful cultivation of a garden and the cultivation of, like, one's inner life.
And there are definitely some dark moments in that journey. The story about his childhood encounter with a bomb near a church is particularly harrowing. It speaks to that ever-present sense of danger, the fragility of life. But even in that darkness, there's this thread of hope, this belief that something stronger can emerge from the ruins.
It's like he's saying that even the most carefully cultivated gardens can be hit by storms. But it's how we rebuild that truly matters. And speaking of rebuilding, it's impossible to talk about Victorian glass houses without talking about, the granddaddy of them all, the Crystal Palace.
The Crystal Palace. A marvel of engineering, a symbol of Victorian ambition, and sadly, no longer with us. But its legacy lives on, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The book mentions that its design influenced countless other glass houses, including Kew Gardens.
It's amazing to think about the impact it had. This temporary structure, built for an exposition, it captured the imagination of a generation.
It makes you wonder, like, what structures are we building today that will have that kind of lasting impact?
And what will those structures say about us? About our values, our aspirations? It's a question worth pondering.
It really makes you think, what will our generation's Crystal Palace be,
Will it be a skyscraper, a stadium, or something, something entirely new, something we haven't even imagined yet?
Yeah, and will future generations, like, look back on those structures with the same, like, awe and wonder that we feel when we encounter a Victorian glass house? It's fascinating to think about.
It is, and it speaks to this bigger question the book raises about our changing relationship with nature, with technology, with even progress itself. The Victorians saw these glass houses as symbols of their advancement, their mastery almost, over the natural world. But at the same time, they were drawn to the beauty, the fragility, that inherent wonder of nature.
And that's what makes this book so relevant, even today. We're still grappling with those same tensions, aren't we?
Yeah.
Trying to find that balance between progress and preservation, between controlling nature and, connecting with it.
Absolutely. And just like the author found solace and renewal in restoring those crumbling glass houses, maybe there's a lesson in there for us too. Maybe it's about finding ways to rebuild our own connections, to cultivate those inner gardens, even amidst, the chaos of modern life.
I love that. It's like you said earlier, we all crave that sense of security, that safe space to grow. And maybe those spaces aren't so different from those Victorian glass houses after all.
Maybe not. Maybe it's about creating environments where we can appreciate beauty, foster curiosity, connect with something larger than ourselves.
Whether it's a Victorian glass house filled with exotic plants or a modern art museum bathed in natural light, those spaces, they have the power to inspire, to challenge, to remind us of what it means to be human.
And maybe that's the most enduring legacy of the Victorian glass house. Not the structures themselves, but the ideas they embody, the desire to explore, to connect, to find beauty in unexpected places.
You've given me so much to think about today.
Yeah.
People in Glass Houses really does what a great book should do, It transports you to another time and place, while also reflecting something really profound about our own lives.
It certainly does. And who knew you could learn so much from a book about glass houses?
Right. You've officially turned me into a glass house enthusiast. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about a good book.
And to our listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What modern spaces inspire a sense of wonder in you? Let us know. Until next time, keep diving.